They were not supposed to survive. Not on paper, not by numbers, not by logic. And yet, on a hot summer day on the northern plains, 21 American soldiers would stand their ground against a force so overwhelming that the West itself would never look at warfare the same way again. In the years following the Civil War, the United States pushed relentlessly westward. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. Railroads demanded protection. Settlers demanded safety. Supply routes stretched across open land that did not forgive mistakes. The frontier was no longer just a place of opportunity. It was a logistical challenge that required constant defense. Small outposts were planted far from support, manned by soldiers who understood that help might never arrive in time. One such outpost sat near a hayfield in present-day Wyoming. Its purpose was simple: protect a work crew gathering hay for nearby forts. Its manpower was not impressive. 21 soldiers, a handful of civilians. No walls, no fortifications, just open land, wagons, and rifles. It was a position meant to deter, not to endure a siege. What no one expected was the force that would soon appear on the horizon. Native resistance on the northern plains had not vanished. It had adapted. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, veterans of years of conflict, understood the terrain better than any map ever could. They moved silently, gathered intelligence, and chose their moments carefully. To them, the hayfield was not a random target. It was a pressure point, a way to strike supply lines without confronting large military formations. As the sun rose, the soldiers went about their work unaware that they were already being watched. When the first shots rang out, confusion spread instantly. Riders appeared from multiple directions, fast and coordinated. What had seemed like a routine day became a fight for survival in seconds. The soldiers scrambled for cover, forming defensive positions behind wagons and makeshift earthworks. There was no retreat path, no reinforcements within reach. The only option was to hold, and hold they did. Wave after wave of attackers pressed in, expecting the usual outcome. A brief fight, ammunition exhausted, position overrun. That expectation was based on years of experience. But something was different this time. The soldiers were armed with a new weapon, a rifle that reloaded faster than anything the plains had seen before. The Springfield Model 1866, the trapdoor rifle, changed the equation. Each soldier could fire again and again without the long pauses that once made them vulnerable. The attackers adapted, repositioned, and pressed harder. The heat intensified. Smoke hung in the air. Ammunition ran low. Water ran lower. Wounded men stayed in the fight because there was no alternative. Hour after hour, the hayfield held. The West had seen bravery before. It had seen massacres, it had seen last stands. But this was something else entirely. This was discipline, technology, and resolve colliding with overwhelming force and refusing to break. The time the dust settled, the outcome stunned everyone involved, and the American West would never fight the same way again. As the fight at the hayfield stretched on, it became clear that this was no longer a brief skirmish meant to scatter a small detachment. What unfolded instead was a sustained test of endurance, discipline, and adaptation. The attacking warriors adjusted their tactics quickly, circling at distance, probing for weakness, and using the terrain to deny the soldiers a clear target. They had fought the U.S. Army before. They understood its habits. What they did not understand yet was how deeply the balance of power had shifted. For decades, plains warfare followed a familiar rhythm. Soldiers fired, then reloaded slowly. Those pauses were windows of opportunity, moments when attackers could close distance, overwhelm positions, and force collapse. At the hayfield, those windows never opened. The Springfield trapdoor rifles allowed the soldiers to maintain a steady, punishing rate of fire that denied momentum to every assault. Each time the attackers pressed in, they were met with another volley and then another and then another. The psychological impact was immediate. Attacks that should have broken the line instead stalled. Warriors regrouped, tested new angles, and returned with greater caution. This was not fear, it was calculation. The battlefield had changed, and everyone involved felt it. The soldiers, sweating under the sun and rationing ammunition, realized they were holding something unprecedented. The attackers realized that courage alone could no longer overcome technology. Inside the defensive position, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Ammunition had to be counted carefully. Water was rationed down to survival levels. Wounded men remained at their posts, knowing that evacuation was impossible. There were no heroic speeches, no rallying cries, just quiet determination and relentless focus. Each man understood that survival depended on everyone else holding their ground. If this story is pulling you in, take a moment now. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Do you think technology decides wars? Or does resolve still matter when everything is on the line? As the hours passed, the attackers shifted strategy. Rather than direct charges, they attempted to draw fire, exhaust ammunition, and isolate individual positions. Shots came from long range. Dust and smoke blurred vision. The sun climbed higher, turning the hayfield into an open furnace. Fatigue crept in. Hands shook, throats burned. Still, the line held. The soldiers' discipline became their greatest weapon. Fire was controlled. Targets were selected. No one panicked. This was not heroism in the romantic sense. It was professionalism forged through repetition and survival. The kind that does not break easily, even when surrounded. By mid-afternoon, the reality of the situation had set in for both sides. The hayfield was not falling quickly. The cost of pressing further was rising, and the longer the engagement continued, the clearer it became that this fight would not end the way previous encounters had. The old rules no longer applied. For the United States Army, this was more than a defensive success. It was a revelation. Small, disciplined units equipped with modern weapons could hold ground against overwhelming numbers. Supply lines could be protected. Outposts could endure. The frontier was no longer dictated solely by distance and isolation. For native resistance, the lesson was harsher. Adaptation had always been their strength. Now adaptation would be mandatory. The era where massed attacks could overwhelm isolated positions was ending. Survival would demand new strategies, new calculations, and painful concessions. As the sun began to sink, the intensity of the fighting waned, not because either side had given up, but because both understood that the day had already rewritten the rules. The field still stood. The soldiers were still alive. And the West had crossed an invisible line. The battle was not over yet, but its meaning was already clear. Because after this day, no one on the plains could pretend that warfare had not changed forever. As the afternoon wore on and shadows lengthened across the open ground, the fight at the hayfield settled into a grim stalemate defined by endurance rather than movement. The attackers no longer rushed headlong into fire. They spread out, used distant cover, and tested the perimeter with probing shots meant to drain ammunition and attention. The soldiers, now fully aware that every round mattered, responded with restraint. Fire became deliberate. Silence between volleys stretched longer. Each pause carried the same question: how much longer can this last? Inside the makeshift defenses, exhaustion pressed in from every direction. The heat had baked the earth. Smoke stung eyes and lungs. Hands cramped around rifle stocks worn smooth by constant use. Wounded men were tended to with minimal supplies, their pain dulled only by necessity. There was no rotation, no relief, no second line. Every man present was already in the fight, and everyone knew it. What held the line together was not bravado, but structure. Commands were brief and clear. Positions were maintained. Ammunition was redistributed as needed. The discipline drilled into these soldiers, often criticized as rigid in peacetime, proved decisive under pressure. They were not improvising courage. They were executing training when fear would have otherwise taken over. Across the field, the attackers faced a difficult calculation. Pressing harder meant higher losses with diminishing returns. Pulling back meant conceding ground and acknowledging a new reality. This was not a question of willpower. It was a recognition that the balance of warfare on the plains had shifted. Courage and numbers still mattered, but they were no longer enough on their own. As evening approached, the tempo changed again. Shots grew sporadic. Movement slowed. The fight had become a contest of patience. The soldiers listened for cues, hoofbeats, calls, sudden movement that never fully materialized. The attackers, having tested the defenses thoroughly, began to disengage in small groups, maintaining distance while preserving strength. This withdrawal was not a defeat in the traditional sense. It was adaptation. The same instinct that had guided resistance for decades now recognized a transformed battlefield. The hayfield had not fallen, and the cost of forcing it was no longer acceptable. When the firing finally faded, the soldiers remained in position, unwilling to assume the danger had passed. Night on the plains carried its own risks. Only when darkness fully settled and no renewed assault came did the realization sink in. They had held. Relief did not come as celebration. It came as quiet disbelief. Against overwhelming odds with minimal cover and limited resources, a small detachment had endured a full day of sustained attack. Not through luck, and not through recklessness, but through cohesion, restraint, and a decisive technological edge. The implications were immediate and far-reaching. Commanders would study this engagement closely. Tactics would change. Supply strategies would evolve. The Army would lean harder into modern rifles, training, and small unit defense. The frontier would not be policed the same way again. And for everyone who had been there, soldier and attacker alike, the lesson was burned into memory. The West was still dangerous, but it was no longer predictable. What remained now was to understand what this moment meant beyond survival. How a single day in an open hayfield signaled the quiet end of one era and the irreversible beginning of another. That understanding would come next. When dawn broke the following morning over the hayfield, the silence felt heavier than the gunfire of the day before. Smoke had drifted away. Hoofprints crossed the open ground. Spent cartridges lay scattered in the dirt like quiet proof of how close everything had come to collapse. The soldiers emerged slowly from their defensive positions, stiff, exhausted, and alive in a way that few believed possible when the first shots were fired. There was no victory parade, no cheering crowds, only the realization that something fundamental had changed. The engagement would later be described as a small battle, a minor action in the long history of the Plains Wars. But those who understood warfare knew better. What happened at the hayfield was not about scale. It was about signal. The United States Army learned a lesson it would carry forward for generations. Technology, when paired with discipline and coordination, could fundamentally alter the balance of power. Isolated positions were no longer automatically doomed. Supply routes could be defended. Small units could endure against overwhelming force. The frontier, once defined by distance and vulnerability, became manageable in a way it never had been before. For native resistance, the lesson was far more painful. Adaptation had always been their strength, but now the environment itself was changing faster than adaptation could keep up. The old calculus of warfare, numbers, mobility, surprise, was no longer sufficient on its own. Survival would demand new approaches, new sacrifices, and eventually, difficult concessions. The West was closing not with treaties or decisive victories, but with incremental moments like this one, where the outcome quietly reshaped the future. The Hayfield Fight did not end the conflicts of the plains. Resistance continued. Battles were still fought. Lives were still lost. But the trajectory had shifted. After this day, the question was no longer whether the United States could hold the frontier, but how quickly it would consolidate it. The inevitability of expansion was no longer theoretical. It had been demonstrated under fire. History rarely marks these moments clearly. There is no single signature, no ceremony to announce that an era has ended. Instead, there are days like this, days where the old rules fail, the new rules prove themselves, and the future locks into place before anyone fully understands what has happened. The men who stood in that hayfield returned to duty, their names largely forgotten outside of military records. They did not become legends in dime novels. They did not seek fame. Their contribution was quieter and far more consequential. They showed that the West could be held not by overwhelming presence, but by preparation and resolve. If this story gave you a deeper understanding of how the American frontier truly closed, take a moment now. Leave a like to support long-form history that values substance over myth. Subscribe to the channel for stories that explore the moments that quietly changed everything. And comment below, do you believe the Hayfield Fight was the beginning of the end for Plains warfare? Or just the moment everyone realized the end was inevitable? Because the Old West did not disappear overnight. It ended when the rules changed. And at a forgotten hayfield on the northern plains, those rules were rewritten forever.